microphone. All right, Jacqueline, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Gary. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. As Gary was saying, the purpose of our time together today, we have 2 hours. The purpose of our time together is that we are going to be doing a high-level overview of Bluebeam Review. Bluebeam Review is the PDF software that we here at CityView we sell with our CityView implementations when clients decide to also implement what we call our electronic plans review solution. And with our training on Bluebeam today, we're not going to be talking about electronic plans review and how it works with CityView, because electronic plans review, I know everyone received specific training about that. Instead, our focus today is just a general introduction to Bluebeam Review as a PDF software. And as we go forward today with our 2 hours, we've got 5 key sections in our agenda of content we're going to cover. And so what I'm thinking, because I know we have a number of people in the room, what I'm thinking is that as we move through our 5 sections, I will pause at the end of each section, and I'll allow that as an opportunity for questions. Does that work?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So, as Gary said, my name's Jacqueline. I am an implementation specialist with CityView, and I am talking to you today from Victoria, British Columbia. The focus of our session is our introduction to Bluebeam Review. What is Bluebeam Review? Bluebeam Review is a PDF creation, editing, markup, and collaboration solution. Looking at my screen right now, it's just a blank screen. There's nothing there. But what we have is we have our Bluebeam Review interface open. We know that we're on Bluebeam because down in the bottom corner here, you can see the icon for Bluebeam, which is the black circle with the white R. When we open up Bluebeam, we can see that we have a standard looking command bar up in the top of our screen with some common functions such as file, edit, review, and so on. Then in addition to the command bar, does anyone see these little blue guys on the right, on the bottom, and on the left? These little blue guys, what they are is they are the review panels. And what we'll see with these panels is that we can click on them, we can drag them out, we can click on them, we can drag them out, and resize them as we want. And then from looking at the command bar at the top, the panels on the left, the right, and the bottom, we have this gray space in the middle of the screen, which is referred to as our workspace. Then in addition to the workspace, we also have a commonly used bar down at the bottom here, which is called our status bar. So I bet you're thinking this is a little, it's going to get more exciting when we start opening some documents. And one of the great things about Bluebeam Review is that when you open documents, such as our training session here today, where we can see that we have our agenda, Bluebeam automatically knows and can read the size of the document, and it will automatically help you navigate through it. So in the case of a standard document, its intent is to be read as scrolling through the pages. We can then compare this standard document to what Bluebeam refers to as a large format document. And when we look at something like this large format document here, whereas when I was looking at my standard paper document and I'm using the scroll bar on my mouse, and in using the scroll bar on my mouse, I move up and down my document. When we're looking at what we call a large format document, such as a set of electronic plans, when we use the scroll bar and our mouse, we automatically zoom in and zoom out of the document. And the way that we can control directly, if we ever chance to disagree with the defaults from Bluebeam, is that we can use our navigation bar down here at the bottom of the screen to change how we move within a document. So right now, when it's a standard document and you scroll with your mouse wheel, you are using this scrolling pages function. Whereas when we're looking at the document's large format document, we are using the one full page scrolling function. So if we go back to our training agenda and we try the one full page instead, we can see that when we scroll in and out with our mouse, it zooms us in and out of the document instead of scrolling from the top to the bottom. So now that we have some documents open on the screen, we can see that the content that is available for us in the command bar looks a bit different. There's now a series of colors available for us for the icons, whereas before, when we didn't have any documents open, everything was grayed out. And so when we think about our different options for opening documents within Review, there are a few options. The most commonly used and one of my favorite features of Review for document management is this guy here on the right-hand side of the screen. This is called your file access. And we have a series of options for how we can set up our file access here. What we can see right now is that I have my file access set up to show me recent documents that I have opened. And from these recent documents, I have the ability to open the documents and use them as I desire. If we click on this calendar icon here by the recents, we have the ability to change how content is sorted and displayed in our file access. So for instance, instead of doing it by date, I could go most accessed. And then when I do that, it changes it to show the documents that I use most often. Another great feature with the file access here is you have the ability to create pins. So say, for instance, there is a document that you commonly have to review and you make frequent use of within Bluebeam. So for instance here, I have this document called Review Tutorial Setting Preferences. And so say this is a document that I want to have available for me all the time when I open Bluebeam. What I can do is I can right-click on the document from my file access, and I can pin it. Then what that means, regardless of the sort features that I have for the recent files, that document of mine that I know that I'm going to look at every time I'm in Review is available for me right up at the top of the screen. And when we think about how we access and how we control the file access, where that lives, we can see that in the left-hand panel here, there's this icon, which is the file access. Then there is the tab access, because when we think, okay, what is tab access? Tab access is what controls our functionality that are functional elements that live at the top of the panels here. So for instance, there could be a case where your file access disappears. You come into Bluebeam and you're like, uh-oh, where did it go? How am I supposed to get at my document? Well, the first thing that you would want to remember and consider is that from File, you have your standard icon for opening documents directly. So you can get at your documents the standard way, as you would with most other pieces of software. Then, if we want to return the file access to our screen, we would just click on the orange triangle here and return the file access. And with respect to how the file access appears in the tabs on our panel, you can click on it, drag it around to customize it. You can also right-click, and when you right-click on any tab item in the panel, you can say where it's going to appear on any of the panels. So say maybe I don't want it on the left, I want it on the right instead. What we'll see is that our file access is now over here on the right-hand side of the screen. So in addition to these abilities here to customize your file access, if you go in the right-hand corner into your settings for Bluebeam, if you go into preferences down at the bottom of the screen, you have a series of preferences that you are able to customize as well. So if we look, for instance, at the file access, you are able to control the history limit. You're able to control how many items show there and how they show. While we are here in the properties and the preferences for Bluebeam, something else to look at is this general section of our preferences. And this is one of the first things to emphasize for users, because I know everyone's eyes are a bit different. And when you go into general from the preferences from up here, what you can do is you can change how Bluebeam appears. Because some people, having a dark screen works for them, whereas for other people, a lighter screen works best. So again, to change this back or to control this setting, what you do is you go into the top right corner of the screen to settings, you go to preferences, and then from general, which is where the settings open by default, you can change this slider here to control how Bluebeam appears. Some other options that we have from this general section is that you can control the way in which the menu items show up in the command bar. For instance, you can say that you want to use classic mode instead. Did everyone see how that changed up in the top? So me personally, I prefer the default because I'm very much a visual person. So I like to see the icons as they display. But then with the visual display here of the icons, I bet some of you are probably also thinking, yeah, Jacqueline, I see the icons, but it's a bit of a pain because I don't know what the icons mean until I hover on them. So surely there's a better solution. So what that leads us to is a question of the profile and the profiles and what profiles mean for how we use Bluebeam Review. And when it comes to managing the profiles, we can see that from the view section of the command bar, there's this little guy with a bow tie. But then if we look down in the bottom of the screen, there's also this little guy with the bow tie. And the significance of the little guy with the bow tie is that he is where our profiles exist. And right now, if we click on the drop-down arrow to the right of the little guy with the bow tie, we can see that we are on the simple profile. And it's because we're on the simple profile that our interface has been simplified for us. So if, for instance, we now change and we go to the advanced profile, we can see that our screen redraws. And with the screen redrawing, we now have some helpful text for us on the bottom of each of the items in our command bar. So then with this change in our command bar and how everything appears, we also need to consider the view section of the command bar in particular as we think about our review interface. So we were talking about our profiles here. We were talking about our tab access. And so something to note is that the tab access and the tab access, which controls how functionality appears at the top of panels. There's also the tabs, which can be managed from here on the command bar as well. And the difference, though, between the upside-down triangle of the tab access here and the tabs here is that this tab will take you to the functional element. Then, some other pieces for us to consider from the view section of the command bar is that we could do things such as turn our rulers on and off. Under this interface icon, we can turn some of the other components on and off depending on what works best for us. So for instance, right now, this guy here is our navigation bar. And so say, for instance, we didn't want to have the navigation bar on the screen. What we could do is we could remove it if that works best for us. And something to note about the navigation bar is that the navigation bar, those icons that are in the navigation bar, are the same as the elements that are available from this view icon in the top right corner. Okay. So then with working in Bluebeam, there could also be times where you want to hide panels and you just want to maximize the space that you are working with. So that's enough about the display. What about document manipulation and navigating the document? So one thing we were talking about already is how Bluebeam knows intuitively how to navigate differently in differently sized documents compared to ones where you scroll up and down. This comes from Bluebeam's ability to read the document properties. So in the bottom right corner of the screen here, there is the P with a sheet. And when you click on the P with a sheet, looking at the general document properties, you can see the page size and the number of pages here. So we've got an 8.5 times 11 versus the 42 by 30. So now that we're comfortable with the documents themselves, some other things we can do, if we look back to our agenda here, as we're talking about the interface, we're talking about profiles, and we're looking at or navigating our different documents. Some other things we can do is, say you want to view two parts of a document at a time. So looking at this document here with our setting preferences, does everyone see the icons down in the bottom here? They're on the bottom left, they're split vertical and they're split horizontal. Then additionally, if we go into the Windows section of the command bar, we have those same options to split vertical or split horizontal. So what we can do, when we click on split vertical, we can see that we have all those documents that we had open on the left. And then from the document that we were positioned on at the time that we split it, we now have two versions of that same document. And when we're looking at these two versions of the same document, we notice that by default, the two views of the same document are synced. We can change that though, and we can change that down here in the bottom right corner of the status bar by removing the sync. So then that allows us to view the two documents independently. In addition to splitting vertically, we can split horizontal, and we can change which documents we are viewing by moving between the different tabs with our split. And as we notice here, you have the ability to split multiple documents as well. You're not just restricted to one. Then once you are done with the document splitting, there is an unsplit function, which will remove them a split at a time. And that returns you to the full screen. And then for folks with two monitors, something else you can do with two monitors is you can right-click on the tab of a document once open where it shows the document name. You can select detach. And then once you detach, that document becomes part of this separate viewer here. And then with that separate document, you have the full functionality of Bluebeam View available to you simultaneously on two monitors. Once you have detached the document, you can close it directly if you want, or what you can also do is you can click with the left part of your mouse, and there's a trick which probably won't be able to do here, and you pull it back up and it reattaches. See if it's going to cooperate. I think our other option is you right click on the detached document and you can reattach. So something else for us to consider when we're looking at documents and document manipulation is that if we look to my left-hand panel here, and from the left-hand panel, if we look at our thumbnail, and we know from before that we can control what tab items show up in each panel by clicking on the drop-down arrow. And if we're looking at the one I'm talking about right now, that is our thumbnail. When we go to the thumbnails for a document, we can see thumbnails of all the pages within the document. And from the thumbnails, you have the ability to easily combine, replace, alter, and extract pages. So for instance, if we right-click, we can see we have a number of options. Something that I know is a common one for municipal employees, especially when you're dealing with scans, is the need to rotate pages to make sure that the orientation works best for you. So one way to rotate pages is from thumbnails, and you can see that you have the ability to rotate pages. Something else that's really kind of neat about the ability to rotate pages from review is that you can control with some precision which pages get rotated and which pages do not. It's not just a blank function. So then another place for the document rotation is, I believe, under the view. Yeah. So in addition to from the thumbnails and the tab access, there's also the ability to rotate directly from view. Some other things we can do from the thumbnails is that we can insert pages, And when it comes to inserting pages, you have some options. The one thing that I find myself doing a fair bit of is that I'll open multiple documents at a time because I want to consolidate them into one document. So that's something we can do here easily, whereby there's this button here of add open files. And when we add open files, we can see that all the other open documents that we have come into the list for us. Then when it comes to our options for dealing with the added files, we can see that we have some choices for where those added documents are going to show up. So right now my default is to add them after the first page, but we can change it to adding it after the last page if we wanted. And so when we do that, we can see that what was originally our 3-page document has now become a 20-page document. Some other options from the thumbnails is that you can right-click, you can insert blank pages when you need. If and when you're working with someone and they have an updated version of a particular page, you have the ability to easily replace pages by pulling in documents. And what else you can do from the thumbnails is that you can easily move and reorder documents as needed. You just click with your left mouse and pull them around. Okay, so with our documents, once we have created them, we have edited them, we want to think about document security. And when it comes to document security, does everyone see this little lock icon here in the bottom right corner? Right now, my document is unlocked. And if I click on it with my document properties, I can see the following. And if we think about the significance of document security, one of the great things about Bluebeam Review is that you have the ability to lock the document down to make it secure so that if and when you spend all this time making this document, putting comments on this document, and you want it to stay as is and you don't want anybody to make changes or pass them off as yourself when it wasn't actually you making the changes, you have the ability to restrict and change the permissions of the document. You can put passwords on it and you can do all sorts of things so that instead of showing as unlocked, it would be locked and it would be secure. So if we look, for instance, at a document that I just grabbed from your website, from the Provo website, we have this guy here, which is our condominium application checklist. And can we see? This document has no security on it. And we'll be talking about security more as we go through our session today. And to tie up our brief discussion about document creation and editing within Bluebeam, my main takeaway that I want for everyone is to know that Bluebeam Review is not just for CityView. Bluebeam Review is a very useful tool that has immediate applicability for many pieces in your day-to-day work life. So for instance, in this case here of pulling a document from your website, you have form fillable. You also have the ability within Bluebeam Review to do form fillable elements. And the way that we would find that would be from your tab access. There are the forms. So you have full functionality there. Additionally, and just briefly, there's some very cool elements within Review. If we open up this zoning map from another client environment, what we will see with something like this is that it has a number of layers within the document that can be created, added, manipulated as needed. Additionally, some other things to consider as easy functions within Bluebeam is that you have the ability to do things such as bookmarks and or labels within the document, so that the next time you produce what's a good example? The next time you produce a large document for the website, you could have a table of contents that is linked so that anyone who pulls a copy of it from the website can easily make their way through it. So then to help people out with their Bluebeam learning independently after this call, I wanted to emphasize that if you go online and you go to the Bluebeam Review website, there's millions and millions and millions of resources related to how to use Bluebeam Review. So there's multiple videos, there's lots of resources for support, and then additionally, just as some examples here, there's a lot of articles that are available for you to read and review independently. And the way you find these documents is you just Google Bluebeam, how to, and you write your phrase, and you're going to get a number of results. So then to summarize our first section here about the interface and navigation in Bluebeam is that we have our panel on the left, on the right, on the bottom. Our panels are a place for us to utilize functionality from the tab Access. Then in addition to our functionality in the tab Access, there are a series of options that are available from the command bar up at the top of the screen. We know that when it comes to functional elements in the command bar, they probably also exist somewhere else, such as functionality from the navigation bar. We know that we can find that in the view in the top right corner. And then we also know that when it comes to our own individual experience of Bluebeam Review, you also have the ability to go into the settings in the top right. You can go to preferences, and there's preferences on each element within Bluebeam that you can set. And one example that we were just talking about a useful Bluebeam preference, is that from general, you have the ability to change it from a dark to a light interface. And what is it that controls these different display elements and keeps them secure for us so that the next time we go into Bluebeam, our screen is going to look the way we want it to? Those are our profiles. And when it comes to our profiles, we saw the difference between a simple and an advanced profile, whereby a simple profile only showed so much on the screen and the advanced profile showed more. So when it comes to the profiles that we use, if and when you go to the effort of customizing how elements appear on the screen, what I would recommend is that you go into your profile, which you can find either from view or from the bottom right corner of the screen, and that you save the changes so that your screen would be consistent. And one final point about our Bluebeam profiles is that you have the ability to import and export profiles just by clicking on the profile icon itself. And we're not going to get into that too much because with the electronic plans review, there is a specific profile, specifically the City View profile that people need to use. But then even with using the City View profile, you still have the ability as individual users to still customize certain elements to it. And then on a go-forward basis, if ever there is any desire, especially for Provo users who aren't electronic plans review users, just something to note is that if you go online and if you go to the review extensions, you have the ability to download a number of other profile options just to check them out, because there's these profiles that have been optimized for certain user groups. And then additionally with the profiles, by clicking directly on the profiles, you have the ability to import and export those profiles as well. So does anyone have any questions about interface and navigation?
I don't see
No
any
questions?
questions on this side. Anybody?
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So then moving on, our next section of our training today is that we're going to be looking at markups. And when it comes to markups, we can see from the command bar that there is a markup option for us. And with the markup, we can see that there are different groups. There are text markups, there are pen markups, there are line and shape markups, more shapes, and then other options as well. And when it comes to the markup, something that I could also point out about accessing documents is that when you are working in Bluebeam Review, it's not just a matter of grabbing a document from elsewhere. You can also start new documents if you want. And you can start new documents just from the top left corner from File, New. You have the ability to specify any templates, any number of templates for your new documents. And then that would give you a blank space to work on if you ever wanted to. And a blank space is a good place for demoing our markup documents. Before we get into our markups, does anyone see the difference between my open documents here? Some of them have a little asterisk on them. The ones with an asterisk means that there's changes that need to be saved for that document. So with this document, what I could do is before I start my markups, I could save it just as my example document. So then once I save my example document, we can see that that little asterisk disappeared. Okay, so then let's start with the markup. And to do that, I'm going to click on one full page just because I want to zoom in a bit more. And let's start from the left to the right. So one of our first document examples that we can use is the text box. When we select the text box, we can draw it out and we can start typing. In addition to grabbing our text box from below, we have the ability to just press T, because when we look at our different examples of markups, there's 3 different ways that you can grab the markup. The first is from the markup section of the command bar. The second is from keyboard shortcuts. So in this case here, what we're going to do is we're just going to press T on our keyboard, and we're going to draw it out. Then our third option for accessing our markups is that there's our toolbars. And in the case of my profile right now, the toolbar, it's probably hard for you to see, exists in the top right corner of my screen. And so from this toolbar, I can click on my markup, I can draw it out, so those are 3 different ways that I can access my markups. Additionally, there is this ability down in the bottom right of the screen. It's probably hard to see, but it says reuse. And the reuse is turned on. And because the reuse is turned on, what that means is that in absence of going up here, an absence of pressing T, an absence of going over here, I can just draw out yet another text box. The ability to reuse markups, which is down in the bottom of your status bar, that functionality comes from the settings where there's this reuse markup tool. So if ever you are working in Bluebeam and you think to yourself, oh, I really wish I could just keep using it until I change it, that's because you need to go into your settings and you need to set reuse markup tools to on so that you can reuse your markups. So then what about the question of wanting to change how the markup appears? The question of how to change how the markup appears is something that we can deal with from the right-hand side, our right-hand panel, by looking at properties. So the property is here. Anytime you look to the properties tab, are the properties for the specific markup that you are positioned on. So right now, from our markup, we can see for our text box properties, if we scroll down here, that we are typing in Arial, we're size 16, and we're blue. But we want to change that. So we're going to put our text to dark red. We're going to make it bigger. And we're also going to change our font. So then from here, because we have changed our properties, I think changing the properties is probably the one way that you lose your reuse function. Because whereas before, I could just draw out a new text box, now I don't have that function anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up to my text box. I'm going to try it again. But then undoing my text, how come it's still blue? Didn't I just change it? Well, that's a good question, because the properties of your markup are specific to that individual markup. If and when you have your default set. So right now for me, because I have my default as blue, that's why it is blue. If I wanted to change that default, what I could do is I could click, and if ever you find that you're trying to click on your markup and it won't click for you, so say for instance you have the hand icon and you're trying to click and it doesn't click, just change your cursor, because sometimes that makes a difference down here from the navigation bar. So then with our markup type, if ever you want to change it, to change your default, what you can do is you can position on the markup that you want to be your default. You can right click and you can set that markup to default. So what that means is that when we do our text again, our text is now the color we want. All right. So then looking at our markups, we have our text. And if we go over to a document which is a building plan for us to make it a bit more familiar for reasons for why we would do our markups, we can see that we have a number of other markup options as well. So in addition to the text box, there's something called the callout. So if and when you're doing your plans review and you notice a specific area where you want to make a specific comment, you can select the callout. You can click directly where you want the icon to be, and then you can pull it out. So looking at my version of the markup here, it's a little tacky, isn't it? But then it's a little tacky because I changed the properties to make a point about how you have the ability to change the properties of your markups. So in this case of this guy here, whereas when we were looking at the properties of the text markup, we only had options down here. Because this markup utilizes multiple elements, we have more properties that we can change. We can change the line style. We can change the line width. We can change the fill color. We can change the text color and the text size as well. And so with that, people who are using the electronic plans review with CityView, you're probably told when it comes to the markups that each different functional group should probably have a different default size and style for your markups, just as a way of making them look different on the screen. So then with this markup, if I wanted to now make it so that the next time I did a call out, that it was going to look just like this, what could I do? I could click on the markup, I could right click, and then I could set it as my default. Then with this guy as the default, I can do another example and it's going to look the same. And I really have to turn off this reuse markup because it's going to drive me bonkers here. And so something to know, when you have reuse markup turned on and you want to change it, just press the escape key and it will clear the reuse function for you. So some other markup options we have, and in case it's not clear to people as I'm navigating through the document, if you want to pull through a document that's on the full size, you'd be on your cursor, you just click, and you just pan through to move your way through the document. Some other markup types we have is we have a pen, and I'm not sure what people might get up to with the pen because I always feel like I'm a kindergartner trying to draw when I use the pen. We have highlighters. Highlighters to show the difference in the highlighter behavior. When you have the highlighter, if we use the H key, you can use the highlighter and it will highlight text like that if and when you're on a document that has text. Whereas when we're looking at our full screen document, if we were to use the highlighter, the way the highlighter would function is like this. So the highlighter behaves differently depending on what kind of document you're looking at. But then with that said, for changing the highlighter properties for both document types, you know that you can go to properties and you can change the color and anything else about that markup. And in this case here, do you see how I changed the highlighter, but nothing changed on my markup itself with the highlighting? Why was that? That was because I wasn't on the highlighting itself. It wasn't selected. So this time with the highlighting selected, and you can see the outline around it, if we change the color, we can see that our highlighting changes. All right, so a few other markup types for us. We have a series of line options. And when you are working with lines, something you can do with the lines is you can right click on them and you have the ability, where is it? Dun, dun, dun. Maybe not on that one. If we look, for instance, in our shapes, if we do a rectangle, we pull this guy out, we can right click, and not a good example. I was trying to show the example of adding control points here. Let's see. Because once you have a shape on the screen, you can change how that shape appears. There we go. So the trick here for if and when you want to change how a shape appears, that whereas before with me when I was just clicking on the markup, and that's a good case of I have the hand selected so I can't grab my markup. You've got to click on your markup, and then if you just right click on the markup itself, you don't see the option I'm looking for. Whereas if you right click on the specific yellow circle, it's probably really small, but when you have shapes on the screen, they have what are called control points to them. If you right click directly on a control point, you have the ability to add, subtract, and change control points. And for instance, you have the ability to convert it to an arc. So you can change the shape of the markup dynamically. Additionally, you can grab any of the yellow points and you can pull them out and manipulate them. And then with the markups themselves, if you do a markup that you don't want to keep, you can just delete it. You can just click on it and you can delete it, or you can change it, or you can drag it around and manipulate it as you need be. So we're learning about our 3 different ways that we can grab our markups. We're learning about how we can change the properties of our markups. We know that if we right click on a markup and we set it to a default, that markup behavior is going to be there for the next time we choose it. But what about a visual representation of the markup? A good visual representation of the markups, and I'm jumping a bit into our next session here because the markups in the tool chest section are so interrelated, is that we have our tool chest. And the tool chest is another one of those items. If we look to my left-hand panel, the tool chest is another one of those items that lives within the tab Access. And we have our tool chest. And what we can see from the tool chest here, if we look to my left-hand panel, is that every single one of the markups I recently left on my screen are stored here in my recent tools. So what that means is that I can grab that markup and I can pull it out. I can grab this markup and it's going to be available for me to use from the screen. So that's within my recent tools. What about if I want to customize a specific set of tools just for me to use? That is where you look to having a specific tool set, and you look to your tool chest manager. And because I like to talk about trends and similarities when I talk about software, when we remind ourselves of the markup properties from the right-hand side, we see that there's this blue gear. If on the question of toolbars and tool sets, we look back over to the left-hand side where our tool chest currently exists, there's this gear that is available for us. And when we click on this gear and when we hover on this gear, we see that we get the option for Manage Tool Sets. And this Manage Tool Sets comes up when you click on it in a very similar way to when we were looking at our profiles and when we clicked on our profiles and we could manage profiles. So it's very similar layout. If we look to our tool sets, what we can see is that in my environment right now, if we compare it here, I've got 4 tool sets. And that corresponds to the 4 tool sets that I have shown as active on the tool set manager. If I set more tool sets to active, we can see that I will have more tool sets here available for me to use. So on the question of wanting to customize a particular tool set for yourselves, that's where we have this My Tools here, right up here on the top. So say we're looking at our screen, we do a markup, one particular markup. We make it the color that we want. I like purple, so I'm going to make it purple. We'd have a particular fill to it. We could change our outline. Okay. So with this markup, I could right-click on it. I could set it to a default if I wanted, but I don't want to set it to a default. I want to put it in my tool chest instead. So what I'm going to do when I right-click on the markup is I'm going to go down to the option of Add to Tool Chest. And when I do that, we can see that I have the choice of where in my tool chest that I want to put the markup. So in this case here, I want to put it in my tools. And we can see that this markup is now available from my tools. So I can grab it again, and I can plunk that guy down. And now I have a lot of purple circles. All right. So we are talking about our different ways of accessing the markup. We're talking about our different types of markup. We've been talking about the difference between the customized and the canned markups, and that there's the ones that come out by default. We were talking about how to set defaults, and we were talking about how to change them with the properties. Something to talk about now would be our measurement markup, because the measurements are just another form of markup. And in order to start working on some measurements, let's center ourselves on the screen here. And then let's scroll in, because a key part of our measurement markups is that we first need to calibrate our markup so that we can ensure the scale used in the measurement markup is appropriate. So from my document here, I know that I have a scale in the bottom right corner that I can use for reference. So what I'm going to do is from the measure section of the command bar, I'm going to go to calibrate. I get a message that says, select 2 points to calibrate the measuring tool. I say, okay. I click on my first point. I click on my second point. I get a little pop-up guy here who came over on my second screen, and it says, it suggests the scale for me. And in the case of my document, I've used this document previously in my demos, so it actually remembered my scale. So that's why it's correct for me, and I don't need to do it again. But in the case of when your effort to calibrate gives a different number than what you see in the screen, what you can do is you just change the number by clicking and just deleting, changing the text. Something else you can also do with your calibration is that you have your choice of measurements. So we'll say okay. And just to prove that our calibration is correct, we're going to look at another length on our screen to test it again. So we can click, and we can see that that's not quite right. So we're going to change it. We'll say okay. Test. Test. Ooh. So once we have our calibration set, we have some different options for measurement tools. And we have things such as a length tool that can be used. And when we pull out our length tool, we can see, hey, yep, our calibration looks correct. That's the right length. And we can leave a markup on the screen like this for a length tool. Some other examples of measurement tools, and what you'll notice here with the measurement tools is that in absence of having the reuse down in the bottom here turned on, the measurement tool stays active for me. So that's something to note. So then with the measurement tool, with my markup, if I want to get rid of my markup, I can just delete it with my delete key. Then with my markup itself, I know that I can click on the markup if, say, for instance, I don't want to do my measurements in red. I want to do them in a different appearance. What I can do is I can change my colors for my markup. I can change my text color as well for my markup if I want to use blue. And then also one other piece here that we have with our markup is that we have our fill as well with our markup. And then something else that I noticed with these measurement markups is that you actually have a couple of options. So whereas with my measurement markup here, it left it in blue for me, if from the markup you look at your options, you have the ability to control them as well. And so to do that, instead of just looking as I was at the properties of that specific markup, what I did is I went back to the measurement tool itself here. Because if we think of the measurement tool, and if we look back to that tab access, it's that measurement tool, which is an actual tab for us in our panels. To come back to my point about the two different ways that you can do measurements, is that from the measurement section of the panel, if you scroll down, and if you turn make annotation off, what that means, we give ourselves another space here in our document, what that means is that the next time you try to do a measurement, we pull it across, it's going to read for us the length, but then when we click, it's going to disappear. And it's disappeared because we had make annotations off. So it was just doing a measurement in time instead of doing a measurement markup to put on the screen. So some other measurement tools that we have, if we put make annotations on again so that we can see them on the screen. Some other options we have is that you have perimeters. And when you are measuring your perimeters, you would start in a corner, click, click, click again, and you can see that there's built-in functionality to help keep your lines straight. And then you would click to close your space. So then from here, with our example of the perimeter tool, we can see that we have our measurement of that perimeter. Some other examples, you could do a poly length. And with the poly length, I think the intent here is that you can see different types of lengths with the poly length tool. And if ever you wanted to figure out what the actual possible value of this poly length tool would be, oh, there we go. The poly length tool, I answered my question by myself, is that compared to the perimeter tool, where it just showed you the length as a total, what the poly length tool did for us. And we know if we click on the markup, we have the ability, especially when we click on the little yellow points, we can pull it out and we can change how it appears. But the value of the poly length tool is that it will show you the length by each section. And if you ever wanted to learn more about something like the poly length tool, just go to Google and just Google Bluebeam poly length. And there you go. That's an example of how when you have any particular piece on Bluebeam you want to learn more about, just Google it. You're going to get an article, you're going to get a video, you're going to get something. Because Bluebeam Review loves nothing more than people who get all excited about their software and they just want to help you out as much as they can. All right, so with our measurements, some other examples of measurement types that we have here is that we could do things such as area. And when we do our areas, we can see we can click, we can drag out, and then that's going to give us the area of the space. And as we can see with my super gaudy markup defaults that I have here, you also have the ability to customize the specific markup types and how they appear on the screen. And with the markup, this guy here, you can also do hatching in the markups, which is kind of fun. So I'm going to get rid of my hatching here, or actually I might go even more elaborate. So what am I going to do with this guy if I know that this is the style that I want to keep him? One way I can do is I can right click on the markup. I can set as default. So then that means the next time I do my area markup, it's going to look exactly the same. And or my other option for this markup is I could right click on the markup, and that's a right click on the markup. I can add to tool chest, add to my tools as I need. Another way that you can add to the tool chest is that from the properties of a specific markup, if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see that you have those same options that you can see when you right click on the markup itself. All right, so some other markup types that we have looking at our measurements is that you can do volume. And when we do something such as our volume markup, and when we look at our specific properties for our volume markup, I believe it's under the length here. There's different ways that you set up, instead of looking at the specific volume parameter, when you look at measurements in general, you have the ability to have separate vertical and scales, because the scale that we just calibrated was a horizontal scale. So when you want to do something like volume, you'd also have to specify your vertical scale. So that's just something to note. And then in addition to the individual measurement markups we're putting on the screen here, we can see that the measurements tab is also tracking some of the different measurement markups that we're putting on the screen. And one final type of markups measurement markups that we can see here are a couple, I suppose. There's things that you can do such as the cutout, where you can do your space, and then it will remove that center space for you. And then additionally, there's markups such as count icons for when you're doing a plan review and you need to count. And some other examples of count type icons, if we look to the left with my tool chest, if and when you have the sequences and actions tool chest, there's other similar count type icons that you can utilize. And we can also see that we have measurement markups such as diameter, angle, and radius. And then one final type of markup that we didn't talk about when we were looking at our markups themselves is that you have the ability to bring in images into your markup. So in my case here, I just have some of my personal images, and I know you'd never put the image of a dog directly into a building plan. But just to make the case, you have the ability to add images directly to documents as well. And I know that it can be a common one sometimes when developers, they may have like an image of the actual material, like a picture of the actual material that they would be intending to use. So then with my markup here with my image, what I could do, and I know that when I click on it, that when I look from the properties of that specific markup, I could add it to my tool chest directly, or I could right click and I can add to tool chest as well. So then one final point to make about measurement markups, just in case anyone was wondering, there's also the ability with measurement markups to do viewports. And what viewports are, we're not going to get into them in too much detail here, but what viewports are is that if and when you have a multi-page document whereby there's different scales on each page of the document, you can add a viewport. So you could have multiple viewports on one document or multiple viewports even on one page. What the significance of the viewports are that you're able to specify different calibrations by viewport. So that's something useful to keep in mind. So does anyone have any questions about markups or measurements?
Got one.
Okay.
Hello. I was trying to measure something the other day, and I couldn't get anything to select on the map. What was I doing wrong? I was trying to calibrate or measure, and the icon just wasn't changing.
Okay, so that's a good question. And my first thought to that is that, did you check your document security? Because you may have ended up with a document that says adding markups not allowed. Would be one thought to check. And then something else to check would be your standard close Bluebeam, open it up again. But it depends on the document you're using and how you are trying to do it. Were you trying to do the measurement as part of a building plan review through City View, or were you trying to do that just by yourself?
It was through City View.
Yeah. Okay. So that might have additional wrinkles to it, right? Because from the electronic plans review side of things, it depends on whether you're associated with a particular review type. So if anything, I would check with your City View rep. Could I take your name and can I confirm for you?
Yes, Jane Jones. Corey?
Jane?
Public works, so I think it's probably Corey.
James Jones, Public Works. Did I get that correctly?
Another question, just a minute.
I will, yeah.
Hello, I'm Scott Allen. On this, I noticed when you're selecting items for your measurement that it was snapping. How do you get that option available? I haven't noticed that before.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a great question. And that's actually something that's down here in the status bar in the bottom right, where you can say snap to grid, content, or markup. And then also from the status bar down here, you can show grid if you want the additional points on the screen. And then you could just choose between grid, content, markup for that. And then also with our markups here, there might be some other options here. So again, we can see our snap tos. And then some other properties for our markups would be under preferences, looking at markups as well.
Does it snap to any kind of PDF, or does it have to be created by DWG or something?
I can't hear a question if that's a question.
So the PDF needs to be created by DWG to do snapping, or any PDF can be snapping?
Any PDF should be able to do it, so long as the PDF allows changes. It should be any type of PDF.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so to conclude our discussion about our tool chest and our tools and our markups, we have our tool chest here. We know that we can save things within individual tool sets. If we want, we can delete items directly from our tool sets. And then something else to keep in mind is the question between, one, how to pull an exact version of a markup, and then two, let me remind myself how to do it here. If we double click. Yeah, if we double click on the markup, do you see how that changes? So in the top left of my screen, if and when we double click on the markup, we're changing the markup between detail and property mode. And the significance of that is that instead of by default, where it just pulls in an exact replica, that this one, when you double click, it allows you to draw out the markup as you want. So another way to illustrate the significance of that is that, let's see, if we grab this guy, which is a text marker, and details mode, it will pull out with exact text. If we double click on it and we pull it out, it comes out empty. So that's just something to consider when you think about the different ways in which you use your tool chest. So then our final point about our tool chest here is that we have the ability to export and import specific tool chests. But in this case here, we get a warning, and that says, hey, you've made some changes to your tool set. So before you export it, you should save it. So we would save, and then from here, it would prompt us to save our tool set. And then if and when that tool set is placed in a directory where it is accessible by others, other people could then come into their tool set, click directly on the main node, and they could import tool set as well. So there's a lot of options. And then to bring that back around to some common Bluebeam resources, if again you look at your review extensions, the review extensions section of the website, they have all of these extra tool sets that can be downloaded and added to your environment. So to show us a quick example of how to download and import these tool sets, we can see that we have some installation instructions. They say, click on the tool set, save it to your downloads folder. Okay, click, I save. It says, go to your downloads folder. All right, go to my downloads folder. I'll pull this guy over here. And then from the downloads folder, it says double click on the compressed file to open it. Okay. Then it says double click on the tool set to import it into review. All right. Successfully imported tool set. And now we can see that I have this new tool set here down in the bottom right corner. So then one final thing to consider with our tool chests, our markups and whatnot, is that you have the ability for each section of the tool chest to add a legend. And what the legend does is it will show a summary of all the markups that you have on your document. So if and when you're looking for a handy interpretive summary, you can do a legend to put on your screen. So in addition to the markups that we place on our screen, some other options that we have with our documents is that you have the ability, let me go full screen here so that I'm making my markups in a more practical location. You have the ability to add stamps. And so the stamps themselves are a form of markup. And if you click on the right-hand arrow of the stamp icon, you can see that you have a series of stamps that are available for you by default. And when we grab a stamp, such as the date stamp, we pull it out. We can make it the size that we want on our screen, and we will see that a stamp will appear for us. Then, if we try to do a different type of stamp, such as, I believe, this approved stamp, watch to see what happens here with our document security. Okay, nope. Sorry, that was a bit of a letdown, wasn't it? I was thinking that the approved stamp was going to change our document security. Let's see if there was any other ones that did that. Yeah. So we have some other stamps. So we have a seal of approval. And with these stamps here, I can see how with the stamps in my environment, none of the stamps themselves are changing the security. Just the main point to take away here, if you want that sort of functionality to be available in your stamp, you can do that. And so the way that you would do that is that, again, where we have for each of our markups, we have been selecting the properties from the gear wheel, which are available in the right-hand panel just because that's how I made them available. What you would do for that is that you could modify any particular stamp here that you have. And from here, from the one that we're positioned on, we're going to click on Modify. What that does is that brings us over to a specific page for that stamp. And it would get us far too advanced to talk about it now, but what you could do is you could program in some actions to putting the stamp on the page. So just our main takeaway here with our stamp as we're looking at it, if we want to change it, is that we could do something such as add text to our stamp. And when we add text, there's this drop down where we could put in some default text so that the stamp is dynamic, so we could have our user. We could change our text color or anything else that we would want to customize for our stamp to make it look the way that we want it to. And then with this stamp, when we make some changes to it, if we Control S to save, the next time when we look back to our document, the next time that we use this stamp, what that would mean when we put it on our screen is that it's going to have changes to it based on how we modified it. So then, in addition to using some of the default stamps, in addition to being able to grab extra stamps from that same Review Windows extension, there's additional stamps here. You have the ability to add your own stamp. So let's call it Jacqueline's stamp. And you can make it the size that you want. You can put in the elements that you want. You could put in an image if you want. Again, I like to use an image of my dog just because it's kind of fun. You can put in text. So we can put in text. There we go, text. So by default, when you do the text, it goes dynamic, but you can also write directly into the stamp. So in this case here, let's see if we can pull it up a bit. There we go. So we can see our outline. We can pull them up a bit. So this is a pretty terrible stamp, but just the main takeaway here is that you can make your own custom stamps. You would Control S. And then when you come back to your document, you go to your stamp. We can see, hey, there's that one I just created of Jacqueline's stamp. And you can put it on the screen. And it's going to come, and it's taking a bit longer because it's got an image on it. All right. So in addition to our stamps, the way that by default, the way that we can change the security on our document is that you can utilize a signature, a Bluebeam signature. So to talk about what those signatures look like, if I scroll down a bit, if I zoom in, what we can do is, again, if we look at our tab access in the top left, there's signatures. Signatures appear like the pen icon, and I have them on my left-hand side. If I wanted to, I could put my tab icon on the right-hand side. It just depends on how you want to use it. So in addition to being part of the tab access, you also find signatures from the document section of the command bar. And there's a couple of things to consider with the signature. If you are just signing it yourself, you could select Sign Document. You could pull it out, and it's going to grab the signature that you have in your account. So for me, I have my signature already, and because signatures are a way of securing a document, signatures require passwords. So I'm going to put in my password, and I can see that I have my signature here. And then I'm going to place it on the document. And then when I go to place it on the document, by default, Bluebeam wants you to save a new version of the document. Bluebeam wants you to save a new version of the document because it is a signed version. So then when we save the signed version, you can see that here by default, our document properties are now restricted. There's no changes that can be made to the document because it's been signed. So when we think about our Bluebeam signatures and when you want to learn more about the Bluebeam signatures, again, just go to Google and just search Bluebeam signatures, and you'll get a lot of options. Okay. So now moving on to the next section of our agenda is we want to talk about the markup list. And with the markup list is the content that's been appearing for us in the bottom panel of our document. This is our markup list. What is the markup list? The markup list is a list of all the markups we put on our screen, on our document. And if we look at any of our other documents that we have open, we can see that that markup list is specific to the document that we are marking up. And then while we are looking at our markup, we know that if you click on a particular markup, Bluebeam is going to take you and it's going to highlight that specific markup that was placed on the screen. And when it comes to looking at the markups and how they appear on the screen, we can see that we have various columns of data in our markup list. We have our subject, our page label, we have something called lock, we have status, author, and so on. And we have some control about this content that appears in our markup list here. And again, just as we looked at that gearbox for our markup properties and we looked at that gearbox for our tool chest, we can see that we have that same gearbox here in our markup list. And when we click on that gearbox in our markup list, we can see that we have the ability to control what content shows in our markup list. So say, for instance, we also want to add area. We say OK. Then the values in our markup list column are going to change. So now we can see the area that's calculated there. So in addition to these default columns that you have available in your markup list, you have the ability to do custom columns. And when it comes to custom columns, the key custom column that is involved in electronic plans review is review type, right? Review type when you're doing electronic plans review from CityView will show as a column as well. But then some other things you can get up to with the custom columns is that you can do things such as like advanced math and whatnot for the custom columns so that when you have a series of measurements, that custom column can do the calculations for you. So looking at our markups here, in addition to controlling the columns, we also have the ability to filter our columns. So say, for instance, we just want to look at the date markup. We can choose just the date markup. And then from the date markup, we can select it directly, and Bluebeam's going to automatically take us to that section of the document. Then if we want to remove our filter, we just go back to all, and we can see all the documents, all the markups as well. And with this filter, you can filter on any column with the filtering. So then with our markups, looking at our markups, something else to consider is how do you protect the markups? So in our case of having a digital signature, we know that our document's locked, but then the document is locked so it can't be edited by other people right now. For me right now, looking at my markups, you can see that I can still move it around. So then what can I do so that I can no longer move it around? What I would do for that is I have a couple of options to consider. So the first thing to consider with the markup, if we look at this guy, if we look at our measurement markup here, if we wanted to prevent any changes to that markup, what we would do is we would lock it. Then once that markup's locked, instead of the yellow points that you would see on the corners, instead what you see is they're grayed out, and you can't make any changes to them. And then on that point, with the markups, you can always only make changes to your markup. So another way to secure the markups on the page is that instead of doing the locking, what you can do is you can right-click on a markup. You can right-click on a markup, and then there's this option here of flatten. And we don't see it on that one, but if we have our option of flatten, and the flatten here, it's probably because our document is secured that we don't see the flatten. But if we looked, for instance, back to our example document here, and if we right-clicked on our markup, we can see that we have flatten. And the significance of the flatten is that you can no longer select this markup at all. This markup is secure. It is on the page, it is solid as a markup. So the flattening, the right-clicking on a markup and flattening, and then the locking of a markup are your ways that you can secure the markup on the screen. And so if we make the question of the flattening relevant back to those who use the electronic plans review, you're probably familiar by now with that step in your CityView permit workflow where CityView actually flattens all of the markups for you. So in addition to being able to manipulate our markups here, there is the ability, if you look at this icon here, is that you can do a summary of all your markups. So in this case here, we want to do a PDF summary. And we have some options. If you had filtered any markups at the time and you only wanted to include certain markups in the summary, you could exclude those. So what we're going to do is that it's going to do a markup summary for us. And hopefully it doesn't take too long here. Sometimes it takes extra long when I do these things over WebEx. So let's see. It's going, it's going. There we go. So what we have here with our markup summary is that we have a list of all of our markups that were on the page. And then the way that we created the list of all the markups on the page is that the markups have a hyperlink to them. So when you click on them, they should take us directly to the markup in the document itself, so long as you have it set up correctly. So those are your markup summaries. So in addition to doing the markup summaries, something else we can do, if we go back to our original document here, is that you also have the ability to import markups from other documents. So say, for instance, in absence of using CityView electronic plans review process, if you wanted to do the consolidation of markups just yourself, what you can do is from this icon here with import, you can find the files that you would want to import from your folder structure. So for me here, I have a bunch of examples prepared. And we can import. And what we can see then with this is it's probably thinking here for a minute because we are importing multiple documents. There we go. Instead of just having our imports or our markups that we just created, we now have markups that were imported from all of these different groups with all these different authors because of the markups that were imported. And so again, if and when you import multiple markups from multiple documents, you will see that your document becomes quite cluttered because it has so much content on it. But something to remember when you are working with a document with markups from multiple sources on it is that you can filter. And so say, for instance, we wanted to filter just on the markups that we had placed. We could see just the markups that we placed on the document. All right. So one final quick example here to talk about with the markups and the markups list when you are comparing documents is that if I close my documents here, and you can see that when you close your documents by default, they get a prompt to save. We close. Oh, and I just remember, if you go under Window, you can close all your open documents. What we could do is that if we open the example of compare, we're going to open these examples here because I want people to know that when you have multiple instances of a document, you have a couple of options. So from, where are we? If we go document, when you have the 3 versions of the document open that you want to compare, you can go document, you can go comparison, and you can overlay pages. When you overlay pages, if we add in our 3rd document here, each document would have its own color to it. And what it will do is it will stack the documents on top of each other so that you can look through and you can see the differences to compare the documents based on the colors that you assigned to the different document versions before. Additionally, what you can do when you have multiple versions of a single document is that instead of doing the overlay, you can compare instead. And one limitation of the document comparison to the overlay is that you can only compare 2 documents at a time. But when you do the document overlay, you can control which exact documents you are overlaying. So say we want to do A and we want to compare B. We have a series of options here to compare and contrast our overlay because say maybe like you're not looking at the electronic plan, it might be like a scan plan. Bluebeam can account for all that. But what we're going to do when we compare our documents is that it's going to open up a second version of the document. And unlike with our overlay where it just shows the different colors, what the compare document function does is that it will show clouds where it sees differences between the 2 documents. And then the reason for why it opened up a second, it split the view for me, is that so I can compare the 2 documents. I can look at the 2 documents that I'm comparing. And we remember that with our splits are controlled vertical or horizontal. We can unsplit. And then we know we also have an option from down here in the status bar about syncing so that we can manipulate the documents independently. Okay. All right. So in our last 10 minutes, what I want us to talk about here is I want us to talk about Bluebeam Studio. So Bluebeam Studio is the collaboration element to Bluebeam Review. because we were talking about how Bluebeam Review is for PDF creation, editing, markup, and collaboration. So Bluebeam Studio is the collaboration piece. And when it comes to how we can find Studio, Studio exists here on the file. We have a Studio link. Additionally, you can find Studio from your tab Access. And I have my tab Access here on the right. And then with Studio, you have to connect to Studio. And when you try to connect to Studio, it's going to ask you to create an account. So if you don't have a Studio account straight off, you're going to have to create an account. So then once you have your Studio login, you have two different pieces. You have Studio projects and you have Studio sessions. Studio projects, if we look to my project here, and I can open the project just by clicking on it, Studio projects are kind of like Google Docs, right? And I say that thinking that I haven't used Google Docs in multiple years. But what I remember about Google Docs from my university days is that, like, Google Docs at the time were a place where a version of a document could be placed, and then people can sign in when they're available to make changes to it. Likewise, what Studio projects are is that they're an online space to create a project of certain documents, and then with this certain document, you could have a managed checkout, check-in process for tracking changes and markups to that document. And we know that when we look at our markup list, we can see all the comments and changes that have been put on the document here. So when it comes to the content and the ways that we would use our Studio projects, you're not just restricted to doing markups on a document. If anything, you could use something like Studio projects for even creating the documents themselves. You're not limited. And then with the documents here, when we make our changes to them, we can save, and then we close it. And when we close the document, it's going to ask us to put in comments about the changes we made. And then you can say major version, minor version change, and you can check it in. And then that maintains document integrity because it's a managed check-in, check-out process. Then additionally, as part of that check-in, check-out process, if we right-click on the document in a project, we can go to revision history, and you can see the history of all the changes to that document. And if you want, you can also restore a document. So say Bob did something really weird to it and you don't want to keep what Bob did. You could just restore it to the version prior to Bob accessing it. And if there's any Bobs in the room, I apologize. Wasn't trying to imply anything. So with that, in addition to the document check-in and check-out process, and as you can see here, you're not restricted to the file types you can put in your projects. You could have any file types. We have images, we have PDF. In addition to the check-in, check-out, if you go to settings, what you'll see is that you have the ability to invite specific users to the projects. And you have the ability to set permissions for those users as well. So there always has to be some project administrator who's in charge of the project, but you can specify who exactly can come into the project. Okay, so Bluebeam projects are a way of having a space for everyone to put in one at a time at a check-in, check-out process. There's also Bluebeam Studio Sessions. So the Studio Sessions, if we look at my example here of the Provo neighborhood plan, what I did to create this session is that I just downloaded some documents from your website. And we can see when we have these documents here, you can have any number of documents that you upload. You, just as with projects, you can have settings. You can control who attends the project. You have this running tally here of all the changes that are made in the studio session. And then the benefit of doing a studio session compared to a studio project is that everyone can be in here at the same time. You can send notices to each other while you are in the same studio session. And then you can do other things such as if you've got 3 people in there, you can actually follow someone because you'll be looking at the list of attendees here. You can actually follow someone as they go through a project. So then to give you a bit of a sense of what these things look like when there's invites, I was trying to rope one of my coworkers in to doing some markups in my session here so you'd get a better sense of what it looks like. But what I can show you is that when I invited him to this project, this is the email that he received to say, hey, someone's made a session, here's the info, here's the ID, so that the person who receives this invite, what they can do is they can go into Bluebeam, they can sign into their studio, because as I was saying, you need to have a separate login account for the studio session. And then what they can do, if we go home here, is that you can join a particular session. And you would join the session using the ID that was part of that email here. You would just grab that ID and then you would join the session. So one final thing to consider here with our studio session is that when we look back to our session here, is that just as we had when we were looking at our markup list before and we did that markup summary, you have very similar icons here in your studio session where you have the ability to do a report of all the markups and all the changes that were made to the documents in the studio session. And then once you do that, that's going to generate a new report for you. And I'm not going to do that right now because it'll probably crash my WebEx, because sometimes that happens on Bluebeam with WebEx. But what you can do is you can know that from your sessions, you have the ability to do these reports. So you can have complete records. And then once your session is complete, what you can do is you can finish your session. And then that would conclude it as well. And you could also generate reports that way. Instead of just generating a report at any time, you can generate a report when you finish your session. So that brings us through to our 2 hours, and I know I covered a lot of content, and I hope I covered it clearly for you so that you can start to get some ideas about what Bluebeam Review is, how to move around in Bluebeam, how you have the ability to customize so many pieces within Bluebeam, and to set it up exactly how you want it to be or how it works best for you. And just the one final thing I realized I didn't cover is that in addition to having the profiles which control how things appear on the screen, it's important to note that these dudes here, where you see the stacked dots, these dudes here can be clicked and dragged and like moved all over the place. So you can customize this stuff as well. And these guys here, what these guys are is they are the toolbars. These are your toolbars. And these exist as the things to drag around. And when you save them, they would be saved to your profile, which controls how everything appears when you sign into Bluebeam Review. So does anyone have any questions? I hope you are all excited to use Bluebeam Review because, as I was saying, it's not just for electronic plans review, it's for all sorts of things.
So hi, Jacqueline. My name is Robert Mills. I'm a planner here, and I have a couple questions. The first one, when you're talking about Bluebeam Studio and being able to share that and kind of collaborate on documents, is it possible to share that with users? I mean, do they have to have Bluebeam installed on their computers in order to use that, or is that like a Google Docs kind of situation?
So that is a great question. And if we go to our website and we just do some Googling of Bluebeam Studio Sessions how-to, you'll find a bunch of resources about hosting and defining Bluebeam Studio Sessions. And so to give you a quick answer, Robert, no, they do not need to have it in their computers, right? Like somebody can join a studio session with Adobe, right? And additionally, I believe you can join studio sessions from like iPads as well. And so on that note, when you think about software options for things like iPad, there's actually this free iPad version of Bluebeam Review, which is helpful. But yes, I would recommend, Robert, that you just grab some of the resources online just to make sure that everyone in your department's on the same page.
Cool. Thank you very much. My second question actually has to do with the stamp function. I actually have a bunch of customized stamps loaded on my Bluebeam program. My question is, if I have a document that's like 40 pages long and I need to put the same stamp on each page, is there a way to do that automatically?
Yeah, so the ways that you would look into doing some of that more high level, well, not high level, but doing that more repetitive piece is that when you look to file, there's batch as an option. And then within there's batch apply stamp.
Did you say batch apply stamp?
Yeah, so from file, batch, apply stamp. That's where you'd want to go.
And then that applies it to the entire document.
Yeah, you can define how to apply it across a single document, across multiple documents.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anyone else with a question? All right, I don't see any other questions, Jacqueline, so we appreciate your time, and thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. And yeah, just remember, you can find lots of stuff online. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.